Hi, thanks for click and play. Back on Cerebral Threads, episode 9. And today I have a new guest. We're going to be talking a little politics, a little Trump versus Biden, or Trump and Biden, I'll say. The verse makes it sound like it's like we're going to town, but we're not. So let me introduce Scott Savage, an old friend of mine from high school, and we're going to try a little election talk today. How you doing, Scott?
I'm well. Thanks for having me, man. This is great, man. It's always good to catch up with old friends, and then we get to talk like adults, like grown men. No
That
longer
part I like.
we're no longer going to a high school prom or homecoming. We're
That's right.
yeah, yeah.
I
So no,
like it.
thanks, man. Yeah,
No, not at
it's
all.
cool.
Hey, I really appreciate you doing this. I know it's a hot button issue, so I think we can do it without the hot button stuff, though.
Yeah, I agree. I
So
agree.
I thought I'd just get it rolling by we've talked a little bit. I'm assuming you said you're going to be voting for Biden, correct?
Yeah.
I'm
Mm-hmm.
I
Yeah.
will be
Yeah.
voting for Trump,
Yeah.
barring anything crazy happening, which this year I can't bar it out.
2020. It's
You know,
2020.
I have no idea what's coming next.
Right.
Um,
Right.
but I figured I'd just start it out by asking you why you want to vote for Biden. It's a pretty
Yeah.
basic question, but with
Yeah.
everything
So
that's been going on, go ahead.
yeah, I think that you know, the sort of political environment we're in right now and the social environment we're in, I sort of look at it beyond just um, sort of the White House and the American people. I think that's important. I think that a lot of things that both candidates, that President Trump and Biden talk about are important. And I think, just maybe my experience as a Marine, I also see some international issues that maybe, I was boots on the ground in other countries and serving uh, uh, in the Marines and really look had an opportunity to just see things from a different angle and meet people from different parts of the country. My duty partner that I initially served with in the Marines had never seen a black person in real life, only on TV.
Wow.
And so Jimmy and I, we were both young. We were all young, and so our youth, we were naive in many areas. Even though we had background experiences, we didn't even know how to navigate those waters. The social and political constructs. All we knew was just being Marines, and we had each other's back if we had to go to combat. And there were racial and political issues then, but our bigger agenda was, especially when we ended up going to combat, our bigger agenda was staying alive and trying to come back alive. And so
All right. The
I think,
team,
right, yeah,
much more
yeah, right,
important than any of
right,
the other
right,
things that might
yeah,
divide you when you're back here.
life,
All
yeah.
right, all right, that makes
But
sense.
I think now, I have just watched President Trump, and when he got elected, I didn't agree with him becoming president. I'm like, what is going on? There's a reality TV star being elected, but I'm sure the people said the same thing about Reagan when he was elected. There's an actor being
All
elected.
right. I'll
Um,
give you though. I don't think it was as bad or as surprising as Trump.
yeah,
I do
true,
believe you.
true.
Although Reagan was an actor, he was not Trump.
Yeah,
Trump
and
is
he has some
another
political.
level of that.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
can totally
yeah.
understand that. Sorry, go ahead.
But I think that just I wanted him, although I disagreed. I wanted him to be successful because I'm an American, and I don't want the country to suffer. I don't want us to go to war. I don't want people to go into debt and lose their jobs. So, but I just haven't quite seen that. And so, although there are things that I just adamantly disagree with, I also think policy wise, I don't think it's been as solid as one probably should be. So I can approach it from I don't like Donald Trump, or I can approach my perspective from a policy perspective. And I feel like Joe Biden probably it encapsulates more of that for me. And although I don't totally agree with everything that Mr. Biden talks about, that's sort of where I am in my vote, coming up. So, but what about you?
Um,
Is this
for
how this works? Can I ask you questions as well?
Sure. Oh yeah, no, absolutely, absolutely. And This is new for me too. So how does this work? However we can get it done, I guess.
Right.
And
Yeah.
and yeah, anytime you want to jump in with a question, I'm totally good with that.
All right.
That's more, it feels more like a conversation than,
Yeah, exactly.
I got my 10 points I'm going to hit you with right here.
Bring it
No,
on.
I totally understand. I honestly felt the same way about Trump at first, to be honest. I a lot of people I don't think realize that how many other issues that Trump appeals to people for that don't have to do with a lot of the base issues that everyone's concentrating on. So it's almost like there's two versions of what Trump has accomplished or not. And so it's strange at times when I see a lot of things that I do like about it, about what he's doing versus what the norm would be anyway sometimes. So it's not even, I think, a comparison against as much Biden as in a comparison against what most likely Biden's going to be a lot like a lot of other presidents and follow the same type of things. So if you're looking at Trump as a huge change to the system, Biden isn't that change. It's kind of going back. And I noticed that a lot of the campaign is about going back to normal or normalcy. And so I think the Democrats are making a mistake by appealing to that, to voters who switched even from Obama or Clinton to Trump, that people are starting to look at it and say, right, but we don't want the status quo, and you're missing the point that you're not offering us anything really new. And the things that you are offering new as far as Biden and his side, it has to do with further left policies. If he does change from moderate or appeases the left in any way, he has to, or the more progressive side, then he has to kind of go left. So even the way he might be pulled, I don't like. So so it's not like changing my vote for him is going to do anything, as opposed to the giant wrecking ball. I mean, I think Michael Moore had it right last election when he said it was a big finger, a big FU to the system. And
yes,
it was. And that was the feeling. And that was the feeling for me too. I actually stopped voting. I was getting so disappointed, with our politicians one after another, that I didn't vote during Obama's second election because I was just kind of tired. And I was like, you know what? I don't even think I'm voting anymore. Everybody that goes in there is lying about what they're doing. Right. And so that initial push to Trump was a lot of it, that part of it. But I think it's also a difference in what people believe is hardcore American values. Like there really is a split in what people in America believe is the American experience in a strange way. And it's almost, in a lot of these issues, whether we're talking about Trump or Biden, it almost feels like the two sides are watching two different movies. And I'm stealing that from other people I've heard talk about, and you've heard a lot of people talk about it. It's just strange. Like an actual video can be put out and we're all watching the same video and coming away with two entirely different versions of what we've seen. Yeah. And it's very strange. So well, Keith, I think that's part of the problem, and is why people aren't able to talk about it. Is why. Sorry, go ahead.
I want to acknowledge something you said, and I agree with you about Biden. Is that there is this overarching theme to sort of swing back to normalcy, right. And I think that just as maybe the phrase "Make America Great Again" that jabs some people in the wrong way. Right. I think moving back to normalcy jabs people in a certain way. And I just want to give you an example. So Biden just announced recently, and I just sort of happened to catch it. I didn't really know much about it. I was just sort of maybe caught it on the radio or something. But he's doing like something called Shop Talk, where he's going to barbershops and he's talking to prominent African-American men. Right. And I thought, about different topics, in the country. I thought, wow, that's pretty cool. You know, shop talk. The problem that I had with that, and I sent his campaign an email, and I'm like,
That's great.
you probably won't get it, and you probably won't read it, and this probably won't matter. But when our politicians continue to talk to the prominent people, then you don't necessarily hear the everyday challenges that someone like me or you or those of us who don't have that status quo position, the challenges we're facing. And, you know, I think that's great. But I also believe at this stage of my life, a lot of that is for optics. And I'm not, you know, and so I think that's where I said, you know, although I got some dogs in the background,
Yeah, it's okay.
that I do think it's an attempt, but I think that Joe Biden is looking for some expressways that don't have construction. It's just sort of smooth sailing to get to where, and it, you know, he wants to be. And when you really want to maybe talk about some issues, whether it's in the city of Chicago or other challenges that people have, and I don't think you have to be African American, but since he's doing it with African American men, I'll just speak to that.
Right.
There are a lot of things that I deal with as a black man, working with some students who are African American, and although our skin color may be the same and we may say African American, I do not understand some of their experiences. And so, you know, you have to work and talk to different people to understand those experiences. And so I plan to vote for Joe Biden. But I do see some fundamental issues and some challenges. And I think that many of those things can be addressed outside of the White House. I think it can be addressed through Congress, through state legislature, and through our local politics, which is a whole nother discussion for another day.
Yeah, absolutely.
State of Illinois politics, I want to just bang my head against a door somewhere for about an hour.
All right.
But that's sort of where, so I understand what you're saying, and I do agree that it was a middle finger at some things that people had just gotten tired of. And that's what I quite don't fully understand, is what was the middle finger? I know it was towards the normalcy of politics, but what specifically was it, you know?
I think a good analogy is Caddyshack.
Okay.
Trump is Rodney Dangerfield at the end of Caddyshack.
Okay.
Throughout the movie, you don't like him. He's crass. You wouldn't leave him alone in a room with your 18-year-old daughter.
Right.
You know, all of those horrible things about Rodney Dangerfield.
Right.
But in the end, he was the sweetheart. He had a big heart. And it was kind of the way Rodney Dangerfield did his movies, to where you didn't like him, and at the end, he has that arc to a sweet person in the end who is a schmuck, but he buys the golf course and gives it back to the employees because that's more important. Does that make sense?
It does.
That is the way I think a lot of people see him. Yes, he is brash and he can be annoying, and I'm not vouching for his character.
Sure.
But at this point, what other Marine would you send into this battle, so to speak? Sorry, see how I threw that in there?
Yeah, you slid that in pretty good. Trying to get in my heart, I see.
Okay, that was a little sneaky, but
but trying to get in my heart.
You get my point. That's the way I think a lot of people see him, as not, Mr. Awesome. And because that side of him, his personality, rubs people so wrong, it is that part of him that gives us the ability to meme, and the ability to have a good time and laugh, because of the way just the personality triggers so many people. A lot of us also see that as a shield for him, because often I see him say things that completely set Twitter off, completely set the media off. And what I've learned to do also is to then go look at what's happening at the policy level. If if there's something like that in the media, you can bet he's doing something in the background too, whether it's bringing home 12,000 troops from Afghanistan or from Germany, whether it's 1,000 out of Afghanistan. If you notice when he does these things, and I don't mean it, a lot of people say this is his 4D chess. I don't think it has to be 4D chess to just know that every time he tweets something that just angers everybody, that nobody pays attention to the 2 or 3 policies he passes in the background, or the 4 or 5 judges that he gets confirmed, or the executive order he puts out, or they often go together. So I think people on our side of it, so to speak, Trump supporters, don't see a realistic portrayal of Trump even by Trump. And that also goes from just seeing him in interviews and reading books where he talks about how this is a technique to keep the other side arguing about the wrong thing. So the news will argue all day long about his tweet, and he won't get as much pushback for removing troops or something like that. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and I'm familiar with that strategy, and I think that the challenge for me that I have with that type of leadership for a nation of many people with many backgrounds and with many issues, the issue I have with that is this person or whoever is in the White House who holds that seat has so much power of influence, and I'm not blaming Donald Trump for people making very, very poor choices. I'm not blaming him. What I will say is that, and I gotta use myself as an example again. If I go into my school as a leader, and my messages are confusing publicly, or they cause maybe arguments among my staff or students or families, but behind the scenes, I'm moving some policies that's improving the grading practices, that's really changing things for children who don't have like other children have and families. It doesn't bring us together so we can continue to do the work together. And I'm just troubled by that. I understand what you're saying. I think bringing troops home, I think there are pros and cons to that. I don't fully understand the motivation of bringing troops home, but you know what? That's fine if that's what you want to do. I think presidents, commanders in chief, they make shifts like that all the time. You mentioned something about judges, and I think that you're right. I think a lot of people miss the judges that President Trump has gotten approved. I think people also miss that, if I'm not mistaken, I don't know as of what date, there were 192 federal judges that have been appointed under his tenure. And not one, Keith, not one is African American. Not one.
Right. No, I got you.
So from a policy perspective, right, that is a policy that I can sort of hang my hat on and say, hey, listen, there has to be representation in the judicial system, just like it has to be in the economic system. And there has to be voices of multiple backgrounds that have a voice at the table. And he has not really shown that to me. Now, maybe others might be able to articulate that. I just haven't been able to. And that's just one example. And to me, that should be unacceptable to the nation, that there's no diversity in any presidency. I mean, any judges he's appointed.
Right.
I'd like to just ask him what's the perspective on that.
Right.
I don't know. So that's
I'll look that up too. I mean, I totally get what you're saying. That's a lot of judges for zero representation.
And maybe no one's qualified.
I doubt that. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody qualified, right? I mean,
but I would like
also,
to
I wonder how many men versus women, what other backgrounds. Do you know what I mean? So it's something it would be cool. But now that you've said it, it makes me think about it, and now I'm going to go check to see what were the spreads. Although
Yes.
I'm not somebody that that believes wholly in the power of diversity for its own sake, if that makes sense. Not that
Understood.
it's not useful, but
I,
so as far
I
as a
understand.
critique, it doesn't hit a lot of Trump supporters, I think, as much we're because we're it's I just don't think it's as big a concern that we hit diversity numbers as opposed to whether or not diversity is good. Does that make sense?
I think that's a great point. And so I want to just maybe if we just hang out here for a second. That's a
Sure.
great point.
Yeah, yeah, no problem.
Um, as a leader, I would hope that our president, regardless of what party you are in, you find strategic and tactful ways to bring the nation together. If I have the opportunity to bring in qualified judicial experts into the court system, to send a message along with the message that I send when I'm talking about judicial reform, criminal justice reform. I just feel like you can't talk about that and then not have actions on the other end. Like, it has to sort of come together for that inclusive type leadership that we're all looking for. At the end of the day, whether we like him or not, the man is our president.
Right.
And so, I mean, we got to be able to find ways to bring a country together, as opposed to saying, I'm tough on crime, but I'm going to help he specifically talks about African Americans in terms of the crime bill.
Right.
But it's like, we're some of the people from the Black community are going into court systems where the judges are not African American, the peers in the jury are not African American, and the legal system, it doesn't give an appearance to be inclusive of a Black experience. And so I'm just using that as an example,
Right.
That judges have a lot of voice and their opinion matters. And sometimes, having people from different backgrounds, it does matter for the whole of a country. At least that's Scott's opinion. So
No, I hear you. No, I totally get it.
but I do not think diversity is good just to say we diversified.
Right.
That's not effective.
Right. Yeah. No, I hear you. And it doesn't ensure diversity of idea. Is another
That
part
is
of it.
absolutely
And
correct.
I think that is so much more important that it's
Yes.
it's something I end up focusing on. It's just
Diversified
what are your
ideas.
ideas?
Yes.
If I got 10 of
agree.
you, I don't care what color you are. If you
That's
all are
right.
saying the same thing, then you're all the same in my eyes.
Yeah.
But
I agree.
do you notice that in more areas or departments than just the judges? Because from what I've watched and experienced through the Trump campaigns is just how much diversity is within his campaign, his cabinets, and I don't think he gets enough credit for how many people he's bringing in to these powerful positions, and as far women too. And I know he gets a bad rap for some of the things he said on video, but he does seem to me to be trying in his own organizations and around him to bring in as many people as he can. And when he's brought so many people into his actual administration, although I understand the judge thing, that's a big one. I'll look into that. But I see it that he does do that in a lot of other areas. And I wonder why that doesn't come off to a lot of people who are not voting for Trump.
Yeah. I haven't seen it. I mean, I see some. I think there's definitely more. There is a female presence. I see that. You see that with the press secretaries. You see that with his with Kellyanne, who in my opinion, when he brought her into the center of the circle, during the campaign. That thing took a shift,
Yeah.
for
Yeah.
him, in a positive
Right,
way.
right.
So she was very effective. I don't know, Keith. I haven't quite seen it. That doesn't mean it's not
Okay.
there.
Right, right.
I think what I would say is that he has. I think maybe the way. I think you talked about earlier about how sometimes the way he says things is not always very eloquent.
Right.
And so he just sort of says it. And I think that when Donald Trump initially got going with the presidential election, even prior to really considering it, he had said things that turned off people.
Right.
And for example, the young man from the Central Park Five,
Right.
who were accused of raping and assaulting the young lady, and then it turns out they didn't do it.
Right.
And he took out an entire page ad calling for their execution.
Yeah. Yeah. No,
I
I
think
remember that.
I think that
he hasn't backed off from it either.
no,
Right.
and I think that what would be so powerful if he said, you know what, I got that wrong. I maybe my cabinet is not as diverse as it should be, but that one right there, I whiffed. I whiffed on it. And the fact that there have been people, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, who maybe have been sent to the electric chair or received death penalty,
Right.
that maybe didn't do it.
Yeah. No, I hear you.
And that was, to me, that turned a lot of people off. And I think maybe that's why people sometimes can't look past the top layer into the deeper things you talked
Right.
about the diversity of his
Right. I got you.
organization.
Yeah. No, I got you. Is that and you feel that's a pretty big stickler, his view on the Central Park Five?
I think it's just one example.
Okay.
Some people don't even know that. But
I was going to say, because I know a lot about it, but
yeah,
not
I don't think
a lot of
people
people even know about it.
No.
You know what? I will have to admit that I don't entirely agree.
Understood.
I do think there is something there, but I put a note in it, and rather than go down that rabbit hole now, I thought there's maybe a topic for the future because that would be a big tangent.
Yeah, I'd like to look into it more as well.
Yeah,
No,
I hear you. And I want to, because I've watched both sides now, and now it's like, well, that's really annoying because now there's good points on both sides. I wish I could be convinced on one person's partiality to be able to go through it again and take both sides of it and get a real answer.
So if you don't mind, let me ask you a question.
Sure.
Just regarding President Trump's his leadership. I think there's some hot topics right now in our nation that we're addressing. Obviously, I believe he's going to Wisconsin tomorrow, and I'm not sure exactly what's all going on in Kenosha, but
going to visit Kenosha.
Yeah. I just had the opportunity to watch a documentary about Air Force one day, and just how much work it goes into flying the president somewhere.
Right.
And I'm thinking, you're going to Kenosha? It's like, I get it, it's a lot going on, but I don't know if they need anybody there other than the local people on the ground. But okay, whatever.
I think it's political. I do think it's political because of what's going on. There is a real line being drawn between the law and order versus letting them riot sort of attitude. And because Joe Biden and the left has been put into the side of we're just going to let it burn, and because the right is now taking send in the National Guard, law and order, I find it hard to believe it's not political to go in there and do that. But I'm also sure there's going to a lot of people on the ground that are going to really appreciate it because there are just normal citizens there terrified. So I think it's going to work as far as making people feel better and that he's doing something about it and Biden isn't. if that makes sense. So I get that it's political, but I think it's going to work.
Well, I think what I see is that it may just divide what's already divided, and I just wonder, like, what is there a better option that our president could use in this time? So if he wants to really get, because I do not believe that people should loot and burn things. I mean,
Right.
what is going on with that? You just can't.
Yeah,
I don't
crazy.
get that. I just don't get it.
Yeah.
Don't do that. And I remember
Right.
my daughter, she went out and she was like, Dad, I'm gonna go and protest in Champaign. And like we went over some ground rules, Keith, and she's an adult.
Right.
But I
Right.
said, let's talk about what that looks like if something goes down. Because if people start running, a law enforcement officer may think that you were a part of something that should not have been happening.
Right.
Because they have to make decisions in split-second situations. I just wonder, there's so many people in the administration that probably know more about this than President Trump that could go to Kenosha because they've spent a lifetime addressing these type of situations.
Right.
So I just wonder, is the politics of everything just taking over?
I think it has. And unfortunately, I think Trump and his administration have no choice but to filter everything through the way that the mainstream media is going to portray it. Because as a supporter, it's hard not to feel like it doesn't really matter what he does or says. They will take something and figure out a way to turn it bad.
Sure.
For those of us who are supporters, it's so hard. You watch the news and they say something, and then my immediate reaction is, now I got to go look it up because I know they've twisted it or they've lied about something, and they may have an actual good point. And for example, when the tape that came out and where he said, grab him by the P word, right? That at that moment, I can tell you, my friends online, myself, we were all just like, it's over. It's absolutely over. You big idiot. I know most of us felt like that. And then what happened, instead of giving us a chance to show that we don't agree with that and he would have been hurt in the polls, they immediately attacked him so badly on it and misrepresented what he said, started pushing it up to sexual assault, and it just got pushed to such a level that was nowhere near what happened. That then, as a Trump supporter, you almost forgot that you were angry in the first place, because now he's being so attacked so badly. You end up going, look, you had me at he screwed up. Everything you've done since then has now slowly crept me right back to where I was, and it's your rhetoric about it that has turned us back to Trump. Not that we appreciate that, if that makes sense.
Yeah. I understand. I get it. I don't think that there's much he can say. And just for clarity, the mainstream media is who?
Your legacy stuff, MSNBC, CNN, CBS, ABC, NBC, legacy media, I guess is a better word for it, is a mainstream, non-internet, not your Democracy Nows or the Young Turks or that type of online media. I mean, I watch them all. I think I'm better than most, probably, that I watch so much left stream media, even online. And I think that's what gives me a better perspective on it, is because not only do I watch a Ben Shapiro or a Tucker Carlson or any of the people on the right that are absolutely hated, I also watch the people who are hated on the left by the right. Your Sam Cedars, your Cenk Uygurs, your Anna Kasparians, your David Pakmans. And so I end up hearing both sides of the narrative. And I think because a lot of people on the right do that, a larger proportion on the right listen to all sides, they end up having a different view that doesn't make sense if what you mainly watch is CNN, NBC, and the legacy news. So I think
So
that's another part of it.
yeah,
I think I
I
went off on a
don't watch
tangent.
MS.
I think I went
I
off
don't
on a
watch.
tangent there.
Oh no, no,
I
you're
think I
fine, man.
forgot what the original question was. Sorry, go
No, no, we're talking.
ahead. Okay, go.
I don't watch MSNBC.
That's a
Um,
tough one.
I don't. I will watch CNN. And then if sometimes CNN I gotta cut it off because I understand. And I watch Fox. My wife even she's like, really, why? And I watched Tucker Carlson, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna listen, and I'm gonna try to
Get your
weed
stress
through.
ball. Get your stress ball.
Keith, I gotta weed through his facial expressions. He's like,
Right, right. I
you know,
know,
he's,
I
I'm
know.
like, Tucker, come on. But I do want to understand. I feel like, Hannity is in a little bit different.
Yeah,
I get it with Hannity and
right,
what they do. They're almost like opinion columnists. Okay, that's fine.
right, right.
Same thing with Tucker. I
Yeah,
think I really like Chris Wallace from Fox.
yeah,
I think he gets after it. I don't think
yeah.
he doesn't care who you are. He
He's
sort of
he's
gets after
pretty
it.
bipartisan, or at
Yeah.
least I recognize that he too is. He'll
Yeah.
attack Trump, but he also will go after the left. So he is
Oh,
one of the
yeah.
few people. And there's another guy named Brett Baer
Brett Baer. Brett Baer get
on
after it a little
Fox.
bit. Yeah.
He's pretty good about both sides, but it's really hard to find news people that aren't left or right now, and it sucks because
See,
that means I got to go watch both sides
yeah.
and kind of piece the truth right through the middle of the two of
Yeah.
them.
Yeah. I think there's some other things that have really hurt uh, probably the nation, this country, when it comes to Trump. And this is the thing, as a Marine, drives me nuts. So you didn't serve. I'm speaking of Trump. I'm talking to Trump. You didn't serve. You didn't serve in the military. And many other presidents haven't either. So, okay, that's fine. If you want to get me, and I don't believe he has a lot of veterans, but that's what he says, and I'm not going to dig up a bunch of data. I just don't believe that. Like none of my veteran friends, black, white, Hispanic, Asian, none of them
Right.
like that dude. But it's because, Keith, he says things like, I know more than the generals.
Right.
Okay?
Right.
So there's not a president in history, as far as I'm concerned. Like Abraham Lincoln got a lot of credit for the Civil War, but if you really dig into Abraham Lincoln, he
Right.
was having a lot of conversations with his generals.
Right.
And presidents, there is a level of wisdom that has to be in that White House. I served at a nuclear installation. We did drills. It takes seconds, and if he knows more than a general, then that tells me if that's what he really thinks, we got a bigger issue than Trump going to Kenosha.
Right.
we and those are the things. I think the Space Force program, when it first came up, I was like, really? And I laughed. And
Right.
now I think, like,
Right.
man, that's not a bad deal. I'm sort of liking that. Okay,
Yeah.
I'm liking it. There are just certain things. We're talking about. I did this and the Democrats didn't do this. I did this and the Democrats didn't do this. I didn't. And then I go back to, like, hey man, I thought it was America first, not Republicans.
Right. Or
So
Trump first.
Yes, it's that kind of thing where every intelligence agency has told him, look, man, I don't know what Congress is talking about. The intelligence agency are saying this. We don't know what Congress is talking about, but we definitely got evidence that Russia was meddling. Now, however you want to take that as a president, go for it. But I didn't like that impeachment deal. I didn't like that. I just didn't like it. It's all politics. At the end of the day, is someone safe for me and my family and for you and your family when they're saying they know more than a general and you have your finger on the pulse of nuclear weapons?
Right.
So is that just like game playing, or do you really mean that? And we need a president who says what he means and means what he says.
Right. Yeah, I think
I don't know if you know
it's part of the package with him.
I don't know if you could tell I got a little emotional about the whole Marine thing, man.
No, it's okay, man. Absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I can't really imagine what that's like other than I can imagine the team feeling, the family feeling that you would get from having to trust somebody else with your life. I I've known it a little bit in my life, but totally understand
Yeah,
that. And that's a good emotion. That's
yeah,
okay, right?
yeah, yeah,
And
yeah,
with
yeah.
with Trump, when he says things like "I'm the best at this," "I'm the best at that," I'm just so you know, I don't think there's I think there's very few Trump supporters that don't just giggle like, yeah, 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 you're the best. We get it. Whatever. Go get some more judges, get some more troops out of wherever. I don't care where they come back from. Shut this down, shut that down. The things that we would want on the right, he is still doing while he does that at a faster rate than any other conservative president. So he is doing more than most conservative presidents have ever actually done after promising, even though not all of it. And so when, like the time somebody said to him, Mexico said they're not going to pay for the wall, and he says, "Well, then it just got 10 feet taller." His supporters don't really think it's going 10 feet taller, but we enjoy the troll he is putting on the media. So then we jump behind it and go, yeah, in fact, 15 feet taller. And none of us are serious about it. Does that make sense? It is kind of a community of people who understand that that's his personality, that's who he is. And as long as he keeps getting these concrete things done in the background, we will let him go on that stuff. Not that we don't believe he can just be an idiot.
When he, yes, and when he's, I don't believe that either. That it's going to be 10 or 15 feet taller.
No.
The problem is that I work in a community where 65% of my students are Hispanic, and there are babies who come to school. Even in high school, I remember I had this weird experience, Keith, and I don't know. I mean, I prayed about it, and I made some tough decisions. And I spent some time just being alone before I made this decision. But I remember when he was running and he was talking about Mexico would pay for the wall. And at the time, I was the principal of a school of almost 3,000 kids. And there was a large Hispanic population. Well, not large, probably about 20%, 25%.
All right.
And there were people walking past, there were students walking past other students saying, "Go back to Mexico." And those kids were from El Salvador or Puerto Rico or Argentina. But some of our students came from a rural area and were watching that and then were bringing that sarcasm into the school, where now the school had to deal with the fallout of our politicians playing games on TV, because the kids were, the timing couldn't have been any better. So we were faced with, do we suspend these kids? Is that bullying? Now, if a kid said, "Hey, I like Donald Trump, I'm going to wear a Trump shirt," and another kid tried to mess with him, we shut that down, because you get to wear a Trump shirt. But you do not get to go up to kids and say, "Go back to Mexico, go back to Africa, go back to Canada." You don't get to do that. And we noticed that there was an uptick in those type of behaviors in our young people when Donald Trump started running and talking. Right. And so, now and then there were kids that would show up to school when the whole DACA thing was happening. We had to call in additional social workers and counselors to address the kids who were so distraught. And I get it, man. Immigration is a tough, man. That's a tough situation.
Right.
But I do think how the leader of this country talks about it means a world. There are thousands of kids who potentially are coming to school. Our teachers can't teach because the kids are in there distraught. There's a better way to really address that. And so I agree with you. I don't believe he's going to build a wall, but what message did that really send to our legal Hispanic community? And I think those are the kind of concerns I have.
Right.
So yeah, man,
I do believe
I wasn't even going to bring that up. You brought that up. I wasn't going to bring it up. High five, man. High five.
No, I believe that is bullying, and honestly, I think that's bad parenting. Do you know what I mean? I understand that it is people hearing it from the top, but I think that's also bad parents who then make that joke in their house or hear him and don't then say to their children, by the way, this is really scary for kids and it's a strange topic. Don't bully kids. So I understand that in the moment, I think the bullying in that way stands out, but it's hard for me to believe that kids who are bullying Hispanic kids and South American kids over immigration aren't also bullying the kids in music class or the kids in art class. And so I wonder, did it increase bullying, or are we focused on this bullying because it was a part of the campaign in such a big way? And I imagine there is an uptick, but are those kids bullies, or did this create normal kids to become bullies? Would be more the thing I would be looking at, if that makes sense. So
you hit the nail on the head, and it's a great it's a great question to ask, and it's a question that at least in my profession, at least for me, as an administrator, we just don't see, things just don't happen. I know when I was in high school, I'm sure that we were like, man, things are happening and they ain't doing nothing, you know. And
why is this all happening to me?
And but what we do is we do really study our data, and we study our trends. And you know, we might take a look at Keith Stamper, who just got 3 bullying reports, and we're like, all right, he's a junior in high school. Let's look at his record from 7th and 8th grade, and let's see what's been happening from that time up until junior year.
It was bad.
And so we also have to keep in mind that young people, the brain development, you know, sometimes a kid just need like a spark in the atmosphere, and they go from someone who wasn't a bully to trying to either copycat bullies,
right,
or they're in a group with their friends, so they feel power in numbers. But when they were alone, they normally wouldn't do that. We had to navigate all of those riverways when we were addressing this, and we felt like so. The other thing too, Keith, is that when Trump won, my staff came to me, or my leadership came to me, and they said, my team came to me and they said, "Hey, Mr. Savage, can we show the inauguration?" Now, mind you, I was in a what they call a rural suburban school, a very large school, but still sort of rural suburbia. Like, and so my question was, or my answer was, what have we done in the past? Because we had TVs all over the building. We didn't have a normal cafeteria. It was like a commons area where kids would eat. And again, you know, you got almost 3,000 kids in a building. So I said, what have we done in the past? They said, well, we haven't shown the inauguration. I said, so you didn't show Obama's inauguration?
Right.
And they were like,
what's
no.
the difference?
I said, so
why now?
I said, so why now? That came across that I was anti-Trump.
Right.
And it was like the attacks were on, you know, and I'm like, from students. And I'm like, that's not fair. I'm just saying that we don't need to be in the business of politics as an education institution.
Right.
If the kids want to watch the inauguration, TiVo it, record it, and or the speech, go home and watch it. Skip school. I don't know. You cut class for everything else, you know.
Yeah. You don't see it that bad.
Yeah. So I just have an appreciation for, if you want to run the media crazy, go for it, man. Because sometimes they get on my nerves, but I don't think that a leader should seek out confusion and anger among people. There are people that support the other side, and like, how do you get them on? Like, how do you get a Scott Savage? Like, I'm down with the president.
Right.
Like, I respect the office of the president.
How do you convince Scott
How
Savage?
do you get me, man? How do you get me? And right, it's like every day is like he's pushing me away. Right. And I'm like, get me, man. Get my vote if you can.
Right.
It's
out there. Give it a shot. I hear you.
So, yeah.
I think in many ways he's trying. I mean, I honestly think there is a media barrage trying to keep a lot of what he's trying from being effective. So when I see him putting so much extra money into HCBUs, did I say that right?
HBCUs.
Right. Thank you. When I see him putting so much more money into that, when the unemployment in the country was just dropping at incredible rates, the elevation of like the Herman Cains and I think like 4 or 5 really impressive fucking men. Oh, excuse me. I've been trying so hard not to cuss. It's so hard for me.
It was just a matter of time.
I know, I'm sorry. It was, but I see a lot of these things that he's trying, and the First Step Act. There has been a lot that I see as overtures he's trying to make. And I wonder what other kind of things could he be doing other than solid policies to try to make that point? Because he doesn't really have any other tools other than what did he say that, you know, some people took well and some people didn't. What do you got to lose anyways? Your schools are going, your neighborhoods are. I was really surprised at how many people responded to that.
Yeah,
that there was a lot of people in communities that went, you know what?
Man, that was.
He's got a point. What do I got to lose? So I don't know.
That's a great. I'm so glad you brought that up. that comment struck my soul.
Nice. I've heard that from a lot of people online. I follow a lot of people who have like gone from left to right, and I've heard that talked about more than once. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, so I hated that comment, that question.
Right.
I'm like, what do we have to lose? I'm like, Mr. Trump, have you heard of the Tuskegee experiment?
Right. Yeah.
When Black Americans trusted the government. And the government said, we got you, man. Just what do you got to lose? Take this vaccination. And by the way, years later, it turned out to be we were giving you syphilis.
Right.
What?
We were using you as guinea pigs?
Yeah. Or the Robert Taylor homes in Chicago. So African-American people from the South just came up to Chicago and said, you know what? Put us in the projects. Put us in the projects and don't fund our projects. Don't fund schools. Don't come up with programs to really benefit urban cities. Or what do we have to lose? Well, what about the impact that Jim Crow laws had historically over years, that impacted generations? And you have generational, just like you have generational wealth, right. You have generational poverty. Yeah. And then you have discrimination and laws that did not favor particular people, in particular in urban centers. And so that was like insulting. Like, man,
I gotcha.
Dude, we got a lot to lose. Can you sit down and explain? Yeah, and explain what you're going to do. So, man, high five, kudos for giving money to HBCUs. Long overdue.
Right.
My question with that, because I don't know enough about it to speak intelligently about it, Keith, about the money for HBCUs.
I think it was just an increase. I mean, I think he just gave more than has ever been given before. Nothing nothing fancy on it, just more.
My question is, has Donald Trump ever been to an HBCU? Has he ever?
I think, you know what? I think he has. And if I remember correctly, the awards he got from Jesse Jackson were for his work with HBCU. So I think he's actually gotten awards over the year, if I remember correctly.
But did he go to it?
I don't know if he went to it, but I'm guessing that he, I know I can in my head remember speeches and with Jesse Jackson, and I find it hard to believe they didn't do it from from a college. But I don't know for sure. Does that make sense? I'll double check. But
Yeah, and I will too. I guess I'm asking that just to say that,
right.
you know, there are people who support Donald Trump and not. Fine. There are, and I am not calling individual people racist. I'm not doing that. I'm not doing that. There has been a systemic, institutionalized systems of racism from years prior to you even walking this earth, and you and I,
Right.
that cause generational issues that can't be fixed by a one-time give to HBCUs. So to me, I would love to see, that's awesome, man. HBCUs, yes. I would like to see President Trump, instead of sending federal forces to the city of Chicago, I would like for him to come up with a federal action plan to address the community poverty in the city and deal with the education system. Because if you can deal with the babies in elementary school, you could potentially cut the head off of gangs.
Right. Yeah. No, I gotcha.
But if you don't fund those preschool programs, you don't fund systems that work against urban centers, then they're going to continue to be at each other's throat because they're living in a culture of trauma, and it's really sad. I don't think federal troops can, or I don't know, what's it, the Department of Homeland Security.
I forget.
They can arrest people, but what can we really do with a community to bring a community together to really address the violence? Because arresting usually happens after there's a crime.
Right. Well, let me go back a little bit and ask to address systemic racism.
Okay.
I see the systemic racism, I think, differently. I often say that when I talk to people about this, I say I don't believe in that so much. But as I've thought about it, I'll go back a little bit. From the time of the freeing of the slaves in like late 1800s or so, from that time period, and even from like the last year or so, to the 1930s, 1940s, 1950s, I guess more towards the 1950s, the comeback story of the Africans that were slaves to the 1920s, 30s, 40s, 50s, the Americans that they became, that 50, 60 years is one of the greatest comeback stories of a civilization in the history of man. What that group of people went from to where they were by the 30s and 40s is one of the most amazing stories there has ever been on the planet for almost every category we measure. By the 1920s and 30s, the black family had more two-parent homes than white families. By like the 1930s, they had a higher general medium income or medium wage. The illiteracy rates were just off the charts. There was such incredible movement during that time period, but that stopped. And if you look at the charts on any of those measures, it is in the late 50s and 60s that all of that started to dive bomb. So it's hard for me to not look at what happened in the 60s and say, what did you do wrong in this period of great civil rights that then also destroyed the black family, destroyed the working rates, took away the generational wealth that was building, took away the property. So when I look at systemic racism, even during the time of Jim Crow and immediately after slavery, when racism had to be at its peak in the country compared to now, there was still an amazing success for that group. So for me, it's what happened in the 50s and 60s that took that growth away and reversed it, even though racism and the barriers put in front of Black Americans at that time were so much larger than people today. Not that there isn't, but how do we explain that reversal in the late 50s and 60s? And for someone from my point of view in economics, when I look at it, I feel that there were parts of the civil rights movement that, though positive in intention, have done some really bad things, like, and which, you know, I see that as the same as the war on drugs, the war on poverty. When the government generally goes to war on things, they make them worse. So when I see systemic racism, I'm not seeing so much, I think, the white culture side of it that people see, so much as I'm looking at what government policies, what did people who are detached from these communities do in Washington that perpetuated the decline in all of those numbers in that group. And this is what I get passionate about, because when I read about it, it's just stunning to me, the accomplishment that was made from the end of slavery to the 1950s by the group of Africans that then grew in and assimilated to be Americans. That destruction of that success is, I think, the sad point in a lot of this, if that makes sense. Yeah. Sorry, that was a little long-winded.
No, I think that was good. I think that, you know, Keith, we've definitely touched on a topic that you had brought up earlier, that people can watch the same movie.
Right. Right.
Read the same things and look at the same data and have completely different perspectives on it. And I think that what is more powerful than the different perspectives is the conversation we're having right now.
Right.
I think that listening to you talk, I'm going back as a history teacher, and I'm thinking about, you know, how I taught the decades, you know, and I talked about the Roaring '20s, and I talked about the Harlem Renaissance, and you know, I tried to make it engaging and fun because I love that. I loved it. And I think that I think this conversation, for what it's worth, right or wrong, whoever has the most information, it is what it is. If the president of the United States could have a conversation like this,
right.
it would change everything about his campaign. If he could just engage in dialogue without the attack of the left or the defense of the right. Those things are established, and they are what they are. But to talk about the social and the historical impact that decisions that people and organizations made have on society today. So you talked about the civil rights movement, and you know, the way it was taught when we were in high school, and maybe even when I was a teacher, is that the civil rights movement came up and every black person in the world was on the same page of how you go about the civil rights movement. Right, and that's not the case.
All right.
And so I think when we talk, I don't know, I got to collect my thoughts. Maybe this is a conversation we come back to.
You liked that one, didn't you? I got you thinking.
You did. You got me thinking. Because after 1865, and of course the end of the Civil War and the Emancipation Proclamation, slavery still continued. You know, you know, there wasn't emancipation, then it stopped. It continued. And so when we talk about the progress of descendants of slaves over that time period you mentioned, I do think there's a geographical dynamic we have to look at. The South was not as accepting, and Jim Crow laws did not come about immediately after the Civil War. It did take time.
Right.
And those laws, those Jim Crow, well, I hate to call them laws, the Jim Crow culture
Right.
Really took hold 20, 30, 40 years after certain systems were put in place. And so
Right.
one example, and then we can move on. One example
Sure.
would be um, uh, uh, the well-documented, or two examples, the well-documented impact that the banking and economic system took on Black Americans in terms of home ownership. So if that was that progress during that time you mentioned, then what happened in the banking system that really stopped? Why was it harder for certain African Americans or certain people, certain people, to receive funding for home ownership?
Right.
And then the other question is why? What happened to the urban centers during that time? So there were large urban centers. Well, Trump would say it was the Democrats. But were there economic policies that just worked against those urban centers? And historically, over years, there were systemic policies that just worked against people of color. So I don't know. I got to look into this. You've
Well,
I put a crack in the dam that I wasn't quite.
Because when I think about what policies really decimated the Black nuclear family, when I think about that, because I think that sort of thing is so much more detrimental and devastating to a community, that type of family breakup. So when I see that it was something like 85% of Black families were two-parent families and lived together, and then we hit the 60s, 70s, and I see the welfare state and Clinton's laws that start encouraging the family to break up to make more money. So I end up looking at policies like that and saying, look, that was supposed to be a good thing, but what you did was incentivize people to not be married. And if I look at those stats and go, look, even during Jim Crow, even immediately after slavery, the family was still together, and that kept things moving forward, and it kept the greatest parts of the culture to keep continuing forward. And so for me, it's an opposite look at just systemic racism and looking at it as bad government policy, which is systemic racism, but it's also just bad policy.
Understood.
And so for me, it's kind of interchangeable in a way. And so
Sure.
I see it more as it's a policy that is hurting Black communities more, but that's a policy that's hurting all families. And
Understood.
if you look at marriage rates today, it's hitting all communities.
Yes.
But it is hitting the Black communities the worst,
Yes.
or in more recent history.
Yeah.
So for me, when I look at systemic racism, I want to talk about those things. Well, how do we stop the disintegration of the Black community and family? And when you can trace it back to government laws, I think then we should all be looking at the politicians to just stop those laws and let us get back to being a community.
I would love if one day you and I could really take some time to dig into this topic.
Absolutely.
I would love it.
I've been writing stuff down.
I think the economic and political conversation with this topic is they're married, and we got to be able to talk about that. And I would love to hear more of your perspective from the economic piece. But Keith, I want to
have you ever read Thomas Sowell? Do you know who he is, or Walter?
I'm familiar,
Williams?
but I haven't. Yeah, but I am familiar.
He's got a great book I'd recommend to you and just about anybody. That's called White Liberals, Black Rednecks.
Okay.
It's an awesome book, but it's a book about culture and how you can follow a culture around the world. And it's a really great book on separating, I think, culture from skin color. And it was a book that really opened up my mind to start being able to say, okay, right. I get that some cultures are overrepresented by certain skin colors, but the skin color has nothing to do with the success of that culture. And it's a really an amazing distinction that I think would help lots of people if they could begin to understand those two differences about the difference between culture and race, that it would help in a lot of these situations to where you could just be looking at it like, to me, I just want the family together. I don't care what color you are, but if you're together, I know the children you're putting into the world with me are going to be more polite and friendly, and I encourage you to keep making more polite people.
Yeah, man, that's such a hot topic. I mean, even for me as an educator, I mean, oh my God, we can talk about that for hours. I want to tell you, Keith, I'm running low on battery.
No problem.
And
it's been over an hour. That was a good one.
But I want to say this just in our conversation about Trump and Biden, is that at the end of the day, I see a lot of stuff on Facebook, and I see people just sort of just going off, man, and just being mean. And I listened to a little bit of the press conference today with Trump, and everything was just these Democratic cities, and we'll bring in the forces and we'll shut that down. And I think presidents, what's so awesome about any presidential position is they carry a lot of power and authority, a lot of power. And sometimes when you're the man or the woman, hopefully one day, you don't really have to talk about what you can do. You just sort of do it. And that's the great thing about what our nation has done throughout history, is that we just sort of did it. And if you're going to do it, then do it. And I just don't, I hope this election does not tear this nation apart. And I'm feeling like that's we're going there.
I don't know if we have a choice. I mean, it's getting so sad out there, and really just violent in many ways. It is, I mean, not like civil war in the streets, but to deny that it isn't like turned up a couple of degrees.
It's
like
turned up.
I would not wear a Trump hat. I would not wear a Trump shirt outside of my house. And that makes me really sad that I can't
not okay.
just walk out and feel like I'm not going to be attacked. So
that's
like
not
I go
okay.
to my grocery store, I go to my local stores, and I keep my politics to myself because, I'm really friendly with my local grocer. I'm really friendly with the guy down at the gas station. And that's part of my life. These great people I see every day that I don't really know. And it's sad to think that if I throw on that hat or t-shirt, I would be probably ignored by all of them.
That is sad. And that's a sad part of what we're dealing with. So I just appreciate.
I was just going to say that. That's why I am so happy you were willing to do this.
Yes, and I appreciate you as well. And we clearly disagree on our political philosophy.
Correct.
But I think the one thing we do agree is that there are certain things in our nation that just should not be happening. I do not agree with burning Portland. Really?
Right. Yeah.
I mean, what the heck?
What are
stop.
you doing?
Yeah, just stop. But I also don't believe that Jacob Blake should have been shot 7 times in the back.
Right, I got you. Right.
I don't give a damn what he's doing.
Right, I hear you.
So we got to have conversations that people can talk about, man, without trying to choke the hell out of each other.
Yeah.
And I appreciate you. So just keep doing what you're doing, Keith.
I will. Right, and hey, we can do this again too if you're up for it.
I'm up for it. Yeah.
All right.
Let's do it, man.
We covered some subjects. I crossed down a couple things we put in pins in.
Okay.
And we'll have to do this again.
Okay.
If you wanted to start doing this weekly or something too, I'd be up for it because this is kind of what I'm trying to get started here. And,
I'd love to talk offline and figure out, what we can do. And I'm up for it because I think it helps the bigger picture. And I appreciate your platform, man. So keep doing what you're doing. It's awesome.
I appreciate
it,
man. I really do.
All right, man.
All right. I'll let you go. And just on a personal note, it is really good to see you, Scott.
Likewise, man. It's good seeing you too, man.
You too, man. Take care.
We'll talk soon. Take care.
Bye-bye.
All right. Take care.